How's it going, everyone? In this one, I'm going to start finishing off the interior of the twin wall panel greenhouse that we built in the fall. There's still lots of snow and it's still very cold outside, but it's getting to the point where it's comfortable being in the greenhouse. And the first thing I'm doing is I'm taking care of this giant rock that's in the corner, and my plan is to use these 2x8 boards. They're just regular untreated pine boards, and these used to be some raised beds in our orchard. And after I cleaned up the raspberry patch, they weren't really doing anything, so I took them apart and I piled up all the lumber, and I wasn't really sure what I was going to use the boards for, but this seems like a good use of material. So I put a 5x5 box together, took it down to the greenhouse and placed it over top of the rock. And I measured and made sure that I cleared the top of the rock. So the boards look like they'll work out in this spot. The only thing left to do is cut a few more and lay them over top to create some sort of deck. But I'll do that later. The next thing we're working on is putting some cedar shelves together. We have a pile of lumber that was milled up from our cousin. He had a lot of cedar trees available and he gave me a really good deal. So we bought a lot when he had some trees down there. We had all different sizes milled up, and we took a 2x8 that we had and we ripped it down the middle to create the 2x4s for the shelves. And we have a bunch of cedar scraps lying around from all the other projects that we've done in the past, and that's where all these 2x4s that we use for the bracing come from. And we have a lot of cedar fence picket scraps that we're going to use for the top of the shelves. They're all different lengths, but we didn't really want to cut them uniform. It makes the shelf bigger and it looks pretty cool. It's going to be nice having these shelves moving forward for starting seeds, storing fruit cuttings, anything we propagate like blueberries and other fruit bushes. And it's a good use for a lot of the scrap cedar we had. But for now, it's going to be used as a tool storage area while we build these raised beds. Speaking of the raised beds, in a previous video, I talked about the plan being to use bricks or cinder blocks or something along those lines to build the raised beds. But the more we talked about it, we decided we were at least going to do the one I'm building in this video out of cedar. We had a pretty big pile of cedar already, and we had the idea to use some of these offcuts from the cedar logs that were milled in the fall of last year. So we'd be able to build these out of material that we have on hand already, and we can get going on it right away, as opposed to spending a couple to a few $100s for the materials that would be required to build all these from bricks or cinder blocks. And I'd have to make a long drive to the hardware store to pick up all of the bricks and haul them back and unload them and then get them into the greenhouse. And that's just really tough with the amount of snow that we have right now. So we decided to just go with cedar, take advantage of the free offcuts that we have access to and the pile of cedar that we have sitting in the garage already. So I dug out a couple truckloads of offcuts out of the snow pile they were in and got them back and started taking the bark off. Luckily, Bodie helped me with that process. The idea for the beds is, now that I have the offcuts, I'm going to rip some of the 2x8 boards we have into 2x4s with the table saw and use one of the cedar 4x4 posts that we have for the corners of the raised beds. And I'm going to connect the 2x4s on top and the bottom to each of the 4x4s in the corner and use the cedar offcuts to fill in the gaps vertically. And now that the frame's done, the next step is to cut all of the offcuts to 32 inches and start filling in the gaps. We flipped this over on its side to make it easier because with these offcuts, there's really no flat edges or anything. So the plan was to cut them all into 32 inches and then kind of move them around and reposition them until we kind of found the best layout to cover the most area with the least amount of gaps. And this took a little bit of time, especially if you're comparing it to working with dimensional lumber run through a planer, that sort of thing. But for being free and being cedar, really can't complain too much. And that's not even mentioning how cool this thing looks. Like, I am very happy that we came up with the idea to use these offcuts. I'm probably going to do a bunch of other raised beds with the rest of these offcuts in the spring and summer when the pile completely thaws. I think I took about, I don't know, probably 30% off of the total pile with this build. So I'm going to try to incorporate them as much as possible. So we worked our way around until all the offcuts were in place. And the next thing is getting all of the gaps on the inside covered. For this, we used some of the cedar fence picket scraps that we had and the really thin offcuts. We also took apart one of the cedar coal frames that we built a while ago, and that gave us a bunch more cedar to work with. And all of the 2x4s will be the ends of the next raised beds that I build. So the corners of these beds had the biggest gaps, so I put a lot of cedar in those areas. And the longer, thinner offcut pieces I used to vertically fill in some of the gaps in the middle. And I eventually just made my way around, filling in any gaps with scrap cedar and kind of puzzling it all together. And we might have gone a little overboard in some places, but we had all the scrap on hand. And it's better to overbuild than have to deal with any issues down the line. And now that all that's done, the last thing to do is trim out the top. So we grabbed the boards that were closest to 1x6 inches that we had on hand, and 3 of them turned out to be ash, and then the other one is cedar. And we thought ash would be fine since this isn't touching any soil or anything like that. But I'm a fan of the trim. It looks really good, and it doubles as like an extra shelf or a ledge to place things on when you're working in the raised bed, or you can put some fruit cuttings on there, something like that. And with that, the first raised bed in the greenhouse is done. I really like how it turned out. I like the look of it, and it's all cedar, so it should last a really long time. And I'm really glad that we went with cedar instead of brick, so far at least. I was able to get in here, get it done while there's still snow on the ground instead of having to wait for a while. And the only thing you're really missing with the bricks as opposed to building with cedar is the thermal mass. But I'm still confident that I'll be able to get in here and have some cold hardy crops growing and harvested before our last frost date. The last thing I'm doing is finishing off the platform on top of the rock. I cut up the rest of the boards from that old raised beds that I had and put them on top. And I put 2 newer boards in the corner, not only because I ran out of boards that weren't rotten, but also because that's where our rain barrel for our rainwater collectment system is going to go. So I want to build a platform for that, and I wanted to build that on new lumber instead of old, potentially rotten lumber. I started planning out the layout for the rest of the raised beds we're building in here, and I think I'm going to do one continual like keyhole style raised bed to fill in the rest of the available space. And I'm thinking about putting the shelves that we built on the side of the wall right there on the platform that I just built somewhere to free up that area. And right now the plan is to use cedar. We might use brick, depending. You never know how things go. Plans always change. But my cousin said I could have some more cedar logs that he has down there because I'm helping him out with syrup. So we're probably just going to build them with cedar. But the snow's supposed to be melting here in the next couple of weeks. The weather's supposed to be warming up. And then it's go time for the rest of the projects that we have planned for the homestead.